Right, so the situation is this. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump are besties. And Donald Trump wants a ceasefire in place in Gaza before he returns to the White House. So it's a mess he doesn't have to deal with. Whereas, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu cannot afford for that to happen at all. He is therefore hoping some sleight of hand will fool the two brain cells fighting over third place in the big orange idiot's head and trick him into thinking he's delivering that when he isn't. How is he pulling that one off then, Damo? Well, watch on and I'll tell you. But should this go wrong for Bibi, Trump isn't known for being taken for a fool lightly. Masses of AIPAC cash or not, and just to make matters that little bit trickier for Netanyahu on this score, Hamas have played some sleight of hand of their own too. Right, so let's start with Donald Trump here, shall we? He does not want to deal with the mess that is Gaza. We know this, and he has told negotiators, still to this day trying to get a ceasefire deal, and a deal that will see the hostages held by Hamas freed before his inauguration on the 20th of January, that this is what he wants. So to achieve this, he has gone to the nation that arguably has facilitated more ceasefires and ending of hostilities over the years between Israel and Hamas than anyone else, Qatar. Even though right now they might be being looked at as a little bit biased, given it has also been alleged they helped HTS take over Syria. Overtly pro-Israel as such a move would have been, as those Al-Qaeda leftovers that now run Syria very much seem to be as well. Can a deal be done? Well, Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman bin Jassim Al Thani has been optimistic that this is achievable, that Hamas have even been agreeable over it, more so than they have been previously apparently. We'll come on to how much so presently. But Al Thani admits maximum pressure must be exerted on all parties to achieve this, which I think translates into political speak as, if somebody with leverage doesn't lean on Netanyahu, it ain't going to happen, but well, there's been little sign of that ever happening before, has there? Not after Gaza has been raised north to south, Lebanon invaded, Syria invaded, more atrocities committed in the West Bank, and tit-for-tat strikes with Iraq and Yemen as well. None of this is a sign of Netanyahu willingly and actively participating in a peace process. We'll come back to him in a moment, though. Where Qatar has been at the centre of all the negotiations since peace was first attempted following Israel's invasion after the night of October 7th last year, it has been decidedly up and down in recent months. For example, just last month, Qatar suspended all talks because there was, they said, a lack of seriousness on both sides to find a way forward, to compromise, to bring about peace as is necessary to make progress. And it wasn't just a barb aimed at Israel either, but at Hamas too. The accusation against them was that the political office Hamas hold in Doha was pointless, since it served no purpose if not for making strides in some kind of progression towards a resolution. It was unfair, as you might read into that as that being. It was a scolding to both sides, and one Qatar hoped ultimately would have some effect, though. Particularly, it has to be said, on Israel more than Hamas, because Qatari negotiators wanted to get back to the point they were at back in July, where Hamas had accepted Biden's version of a ceasefire at that point, but Israel had not. Following this not happening, though, Trump obviously got elected the next president, and following that, almost immediately, he urged Qatar to get involved again, begin talks once more, and get this dealt with before it became his problem, effectively. First and foremost, one of the most significant sticking points for Trump's desire to get this dealt with, though, before he returns to office, is genocide Joe Biden's interventions, because so overtly and persistently pro-Israel has he been, that his role is one of just making matters worse now. He's Israel's man all the way. Everybody knows it and sees it. He's continued to fight for more financial aid and military packages for Israel despite everything they've done, as these negotiations have been attempted as well. And even as Hamas grow ever more lenient in what they'd be willing to accept as part of a deal, it doesn't seem to shift the US position to just keep on supplying more arms to Israel. The sooner he is gone from the Middle East's perspective, the better. But of course, that leaves a mess that Trump doesn't want still in his lap. Newsflash, Donnie. You can wish this problem away, but it's still going to be yours to deal with, I fancy. Now, one reason for that is the sheer amount of AIPAC cash washing around the Republican Party, much as it is in the Democratic Party, kind of proving that old adage of being the best democracy money can buy, because the Israel lobby very much appear to have done just that. But the reopening of negotiations with Hamas and Israel by Qatar, it was hoped, would, as I said a moment ago, return to the position parties were at back in July. Or it would give Netanyahu instead a chance to develop a new framework for peace if he was inclined to offer one. And he was offered this opportunity to do that in good faith. But when you give Benjamin Netanyahu an inch, he takes a great big sodding mile. Netanyahu, as we know, does not want peace. does not want to end his war in Gaza, he cannot afford to settle matters in Gaza. His hard-right coalition partners won't have a bar of it. They are utterly beholden to the Israeli settler movement, and they've already been measuring the curtains up in Gaza. So war, functionally, cannot end if Netanyahu wants to stay in post. He also hoped the war would keep him out of the courtroom, incidentally, too, but that hasn't happened either, as he begins his own testimony today in his corruption trial, but that's a video for another time. Where Netanyahu and Israel are concerned, though, therefore, when it comes to this ceasefire and these talks, it's all about making matters look good in front of Trump, taking him for a fool, still playing the best mates card while functionally not shifting on anything at all. And they are very much, in my view, relying on Trump's stupidity and refusal to ever read or be across his brief properly to know any different. Last week, more peace talks were held, this time in the other state that had been heavily involved in ceasefire talks and negotiations, Egypt. Despite weeks of being on break from negotiations, despite re-entering negotiations allegedly with a view to making progress, Israel brought absolutely nothing new to the table. They still want to be left in control in Gaza. They still want to leave a presence there, the IDF there. They still want to leave the Strip divided, and they still want to keep the north of Gaza empty and not allow people to return to their homes. Clearly, this is not the way to progress. But this also isn't what it fed back to Trump, because Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, told Israeli media earlier in the week that a deal was close as a breakthrough had just been made. Well, Trump will listen to that. He'll certainly hear that. He won't listen to Hamas when they say this is nonsense, no progress has been made at all. And Hamas, along with mediators, are very much of the opinion that this is all a carefully orchestrated charade to trick Trump into thinking things are going well, only to find that when he does reach power, that isn't the case. And of course Israel will just blame Hamas for that. They then think, because Trump really can't be bothered with this situation, that Israel will trade that ceasefire for something else really big with Trump. Like, for example, full annexation of the West Bank, which is also being pushed for. Trump is lazy and disinterested in the Middle East. He doesn't want to deal with this mess. So for an easy option and an easy way out, I certainly believe he's quite mad enough to accept those terms. Therefore, Israel are treating Trump like a chump right now, and he'll be too blind to see it. He's too lazy not to walk into their trap. But Hamas have thrown a curveball, a very unexpected one, if I'm honest. I said earlier they'd become more lenient in regards to a deal. I also said earlier I couldn't see Israel letting up in Gaza either, though perhaps getting the whole of the much larger West Bank would be a trade they'd make on that score, only to return to Gaza later, as they inevitably would, if they ever actually left to begin with. Israel's word being largely worthless, as we know by now. But in the name of progress, Hamas have agreed to a massive concession. And that is that they are now prepared to allow Israel to remain in the Gaza Strip. Israel currently occupy the north of Gaza, the Netzarim corridor, which they built across the centre of Gaza, and the Philadelphia corridor, which includes the Rafah border crossing, forming the border in the south between Gaza and Egypt. Hamas have reportedly accepted Israel remaining everywhere except the Philadelphia corridor, which is a violation of a peace accord between Israel and Egypt anyway. And of course the hostages will be released in exchange with this. Ball firmly, very much firmly placed back in Israel's court, and in theory that means Hamas are offering up to Trump exactly what he wants here. Certainly that ought to be what Qatar and Egypt are reporting back, because if Israel accept this, they lose leverage. And of course without something major in return, Netanyahu still cannot afford to end this war. He will be forced by Hamas's actions here and now, their offer, to turn down a ceasefire where his IDF get to remain in Gaza and the hostages go back. It's that, he agrees to that, or his government collapses instead. We've seen no sign of Netanyahu ever placing anything that's more important than he himself remaining in power. So surely he's going to refuse this with all the horrendous optics and bad press that'll go with it. And surely even someone as dumb as Donald Trump can't fail to see who was at fault at that point. But will that AIPAC cash speak loudly enough to Trump when the inevitable surely happens courtesy of Benjamin Netanyahu and all of this falls through yet again? Probably is the answer, let's be honest. Nonetheless, Israel will get shown up for being the dishonest peace brokers they are yet again for the umpteenth time, possibly in the worst possible way yet, if all of this comes to pass in the eyes of the world as it will, where public opinion of the genocidal apartheid state will fall again, as it will for anyone in a position of power still prepared to defend them. I'd love to see all this plan out. I'd love to see Netanyahu squirm, and squirm he's going to over this. He's so used to getting everything he wants, and there's no way he's going to come out of this smelling of roses in any way, shape or form. Of course, he doesn't always get his way anyway, does he? He is, after all, 4 years of running away from a corruption trial, and he's back in court for that, as he's tried to avoid it all that time. He's tried to push it back, tried to delay it. The resumption of his corruption trial began again on Tuesday, so do get all the details of that, so far as we know it at this point, in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. And please do hit like, share and subscribe whilst you're here if you haven't already done so, to help support the channel. It's very much appreciated, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.